So there's three things that we are hoping to do in our afternoon. Take whatever questions you might have remaining. If we have time beyond that, Marge and I each have a question we were hoping to ask you. And then we also have all of our slides on the computer if you want to copy them to a pen drive.
다 탄다 인구 접라 ఖర్చే라는 계란서 튀어 가져요 다 탄다 디 아니야 튀어 땅으로 치스라 아니 마르스다 쿠라니기 랭제기 있스til라 안 대하는지 계란서 탄다보다 진짜 가가스토에 슬라이드 주라 디 델라 샤이레스 계란서 구고는 남에 레스네 슈네 디그레스.
All right, so you guys got anything on your mind before the test tomorrow? Any big questions for us?
다 상이 익제디 마당 공라 아니 계란서니 튀어요나 탄다 튀어 땅으로 치스.
아니 벤제 디시하고 레리 에너지 디시를 시키면 어떻게 해야 되나?
엘릴게 되셔라
벤제 디시하고 레리 에너지 디시를 시키면 어떻게 해야 되나?
당보디 가르로 한베 펠규르기
벤제 디시하고
슈그나본
레리 안에 에너지 디시를 시키면 어떻게 해야
펠규르기 슈그나보디 엘릴게 되셔라 So what are the 5 forces and how does it influence these gene frequency?
Okay, so number 1, natural selection, which, right, as we saw, if you've got the bad knife beak, you're not going to get food, you might die off, and in the next generation, we will see very few knife beak alleles and many spoon beak alleles.
And the shugna기 pelgurgi shugnadigi rigze and the rigzegi dochula and shugen chigi reslan tishasra and this shungabo the kari res and khandes shugen chigi reslan the theorish and laying karigaslana and the rangjong them to shukchik chashawainas the keran zutaji chidugala tidan tuma peju chimbas chiugi chudo ro samshini and dende rojimana chogdujina la tidan tumaniga yo chudo imbainas Tuma yoge se mangara roas ni ti yoge chudo di mangche shiru res se marani diladu ani rigyu chima dita du gala ani chogdu nangla tuma yoge ngi chudo yoge jura dinde rig mangal hagi res ani ti yoge ngi chudo ridi alil di nyungru du res.
Sexual selection, we can see a change in allele frequency there if, say, all the female birds are very attracted to the bright red colored birds. We'll see an increase in the red allele frequency and a decrease in the dull brown allele frequency.
Shungnibadi doje dengru chagi res. The digi khande shugen chigurlana peshana charigna la cha mo denso ani po khagas ki khado marayona harayona digas ki dirang la du res la ni shevai nas pezun shana ta diladu gala chogdina la khari chigurla na maurik mangal hadi ros and khado shimba rigju mautis kya denso rigdenso ni mea chadu nyuru du res chogdina digi ya dochula kheba du res alilgi.
Bottleneck effect, that's when you have a large population, something kind of catastrophic happens or something bad happens and you shrink your population down to a very small population. That can change allele frequency if, for example, one year there's a really horrible flu virus and most of the population dies from it, but some people have immunity to it because of an allele. We will see a big jump up in that anti-flu allele and we'll see a loss of many other alleles.
Shugen tingichi khari chadulana shukchik phumge lan yos phumge di chawires dina kharchi gor lawena chogdu chigna la changma yochi ani chungwa chi tap minda tap mile boy ani chungwa ji chungni ta dina la chogdu na ge chongmi ta dilawara mimbor miro chashana mimbor mangche ma de ron chini ani mimbor nyong ro do an chogdu la khebar sugures an pe shawena chogdu ji yores mi chogdu dina la ani mi damenda mangbu edugala nazaji lewa nas chogdu dila an nazadi phoni mi mangbu shiu jita nazadi phoni khonjogi gonge chidu yo enas khonjogi thanda nego malagi ta jingni nazadi ka thu yo enas dige rilha digres ta shemba dinjo nego mala dila ya machin dinjo shidu ruas dila dugala di chogdu nal gyo chikto sares.
We mentioned that there was a disease in Europe long ago called the bubonic plague. That wiped out 30% of Europeans and even more, higher percent in concentrated areas.
Dilo the Europe nal chasha na nazaj le res plague lady. The any gadget sumju stoji that did naza di po de yo chad res Europe nala. The any saja mi manga desa del po de res.
There was an allele for a gene that conferred resistance, and in the time after the plague had gone, there was a very high frequency of that allele of that gene.
Chesa naza di po roas plague lady Europe nala. The less ho jela ani manju jela rigze na tadu gala rigze khashi khari or law na tanda naza di go thunge din rigyo res. Jela ani naza di po sani naza di yes hadu rigze tadu gala chogdu nala. Di rike elil jora neza go thunge gi. Dinde elil mangro to chogdu ne res.
Karma, is there a separate word for allele and gene when you're translating?
In the book, for allele, it's mentioned the same allele, and for gene, we have Tibetan term. So I'm using different terms for both. Yeah.
Founder effect, which is when you have a few organisms from your population go and start a new colony somewhere, and if, you know, again, small numbers, you might by chance have those few founding members have a different frequency of alleles. So in their new population, the allele frequencies will be different.
Dilo du shugenchi khari urlana chodu chimbuchi ne kyujik ma thweni ra saja loga jela koram pe nangmi doji and di ani jela khali chodu ji chagras di ge ani rigze ge dochu ta ona di loga chagyo res.
Some people joke that in the United States, people can be very aggressive and risk-taking because a lot of us are descended from people who left Europe on a very dangerous, risky voyage for the adventure of starting in a new land.
Dilo do arina micha shwana mangcha khari urlana ta daminde che gawo che ni nyenga densu su donglin che jora dindri gawo yores chidangi ani quran su gi ya mebo de theo ena khane ni le orlana Europe ni ari la pe sha yo dindri cha de res ngoma ni quran su nyenga densu donglin chengi rig chi cha de res.
In Australia, all the white people that are there are people who were kicked out of England because they were prisoners. So you may not want to go to Australia.
The America rig the Australia do cha shona mangche pi res nima dilo do ani Australia la dundu chi mares peje.
But Australians are very nice people, but they're very adventurous.
In Australia mi densu ya bo res.
And gene drift, which is the idea that if just by random chance you might have more babies of one particular allele one year, and that effect is mostly seen in small populations.
The chick the rigze phoju rechigin so the thangi de yakuting genetic drift like the rest di kharir lana chogdu gi nanglo la ani rigze thada allele gyo do jora di ani ngeme gi gyo do res allele gyo do dandi.
So when we had our sickle cell game, each of you had a village of 50 people, and in your next generation, your village might have a different allele frequency from the village of the people next to you, because you just happened by chance to have differences.
Thanda nyemere la jora dechu allele gi dechu di gyo do di nyemere la di chi khari thanda pesu khari sharla na khiran su chego ji chi bas di khar la na jo sorip thabo yengi gi thanda thongse ji yores di na lo ani thanda mi tai ba chego chi ni di la du gala jela khari chungyu me di shetu go maras khogab gi ras nyemere di ani dechu di gyo do di nyeme cha do res allele khandi mangal li re la jora di seu shetu go maras nyemere khogab gi wangi cha yores di gyo do di.
Was that enough detail to answer their question?
The two the length of yes.
ninja simula tene di Tibetan jira tema discusso.
Nijur la tene.
Ninja ki Tibetan jira tu ibone kaisa ini ninja simula.
Nijur la tene pergur chungas la.
ninja ki Tibetan jira kuma kanda kaza jira mani pati sonso. Ninja ki. Tibetan jira kuma to Matuma ni chigone jini te la de karsa ninja simula to jaja ni ngube ini ngaru
Nijur khashi gi phingre la roas ra dirwa
ninja ki di jwa di jwa neda ninja ki Tibetan jira tu ibone cha karsa jini de ngube to la phingre
Nijur chimba na pergur dwell phingre ra mare
ni jwa 어떤 데가 인질기가 Tibetan 들어왔던 동안 가비린 가비 많이 했었대.
Nyur ki kharila? Tikarla, ne tizela. Tizela.
가비린 가비 많이 했었대. 그 제시 잡아 가지고 가다. 그래서 아무튼 뭐
Nyur ki tizela.
질 못해서 제가 이 프로틴 선수 요한
Alile tikar jiu gyua dwedi. Andi thyo hare. Di korla deshe yarushta se ucha masusre. Okay. So so he wants to know like mutation in the DNA leads to change in the protein structures, and sometimes it doesn't matter whether the protein is changed or not. So he wants to know about mutation in the DNA and the protein, relationship between these two.
Okay. That's a complicated question because there's a lot of different ways you can get mutations and different effects.
The thyo ditis che nyosing ro chayo re khanan dinala gyurdo nyegyur dre jora de ke mangbu gi wang yu go res ke loga yu res di yongel.
Let's say we have this sequence in a messenger in DNA.
Ta di chashas DNA gi thanda khorim jora phulje tikdang di imba chashas.
Okay, so we make our RNA, and now we make our protein. And our protein and everything is much longer than what I'm drawing. And this now folds up. Where square interacts with an amino acid far away, as does triangle, and circles just hanging out there.
The thanda di DNA bacha shala ra. Di DNA di ani dashu chene RNA rest di. Di RNA di ticker rest inzo ra ma dugu rest. Tinzo amino cure re chungi rest. The thanda di na summa shtem das chida ticker lana amino cure mangbu shu rest thanda chashe shtem she rest dina. The di ticker to cha na di amino cure di ma tepsu thei la ra. Di tepsu thesa ni dinde roji chagi ras. Dila du thanda di amino cure sum di cha na di sum res. Riri che tuchi che ani sursum shadwa. Di sum an koras tepsu thedu kala di da di nyam do che di da di ni khacho ten de res. Ine thanda di riri di tongba koran chibul ha de res.
Okay, so this is what normally happens, and of course we're pretending that, you know, the gene is much longer, the protein is much longer, we're just showing a little bit of it.
Ta rigze da di rigze tungu ra. Rigze dila ringa yo res ngoene sultana. Thanda di chashi chunjush mashte mes thana sticker yan dila ringa yo res.
Now let's say I get a mutation in my DNA. I get a T accidentally. When I copy that to RNA, I'm going to get a U. But maybe this, either CCC or CCU, both code for triangle, so no problem in the protein.
Ta thanda dela gyurdoji chimba inas ra peshana. Ta di gyurdo drone nye la khari re di sabla thanda T jile de res pulje pure dora da nye gyur cha res ra. Di kengi ani RNA di khari chagirla na U chagirwas dashu chedugala. Ta di RNA dashu chedugala khuraniga gi thanda nguengi amino cure jora di thanda chikbachikya tigar chikbachikya tungi res nguengi phulje khari imba jora di da chikbachikya chesa puro tigar chikpa endugala kheba khesyo ma res di nyegyur dige.
That's an example of a mutation in the DNA that's not a problem for the protein.
Di la du thanda gyurdo di khol nyegyur di khol chayr la na DNA la chung res ni tigar la khekang yo ma res rangja de res.
DNA sequence is different, but the protein is the same. Okay, now what happens if instead of this one being mutated, maybe I get a different mutation in my DNA. which will lead to a mutation in my RNA. And now that leads to a mutation here in my protein, which means that my triangle is now a diamond and doesn't interact with this guy anymore, so it folds differently.
Ta thanda de nyegyur gyo dwe jura di khol dwe la ina thangbo del phuje thangbo del dwe ina stra di sum sum digyura di rodu gala an RNA le gyo the res RNA le gyo rodu ta dinala tigar kheba su res ta tiga minda ji tu res thanda ngola sursum shaira pesha du ta thanda di phalam suji chaya res ta dilla du ngola thanda sursum endu gala di da dinya nyam do thei dos phenju dewa chagyo ras ta thanda di phalam su di chadu gala di Quranchi puji loga chadu res tepsuna ligyo mares.
So mutation in my DNA, mutation in my protein, and it doesn't work anymore.
Dilla du ta thanda dela nyejur di khawa chung la ina DNA nang chung re thanashi tigar tize nang la chung res tize dilega ching mares namjuro.
Now, just to complicate things, of course, biology is complicated. Let's say instead of mutating here, all of that's normal, but I get a mutation here. Instead, and now I get squiggle mark.
Tat yurdo kesi dewa dojil chungwe nas ta di niwa del chasha sa de chayna an dilai RNA lai jo duras dine tigar mendo ju du res ta thanda dina chasha na dil ke gyo swe mar khaina na rangja ros dil gyo do res sumba dil.
So mutation in my DNA, mutation in my protein. So instead of circle here, I get squiggle, but that circle wasn't interacting with anybody. It was just hanging out in this empty space. So it's okay that it's a squiggle. So my protein is still okay functioning.
Ta thanda dina chasha du gala dil gyo thera yurdo del do res ne yur chasa tigar di cha de res ta di tepsi the du gala ne la di khol yor la na ne di go ne del yora go di thanda nga jo tigar tizi na ta du gala chila thwen de res khora pinju de chi sa min do as mo ni cheza andi chila de du thanda e chila yores ke ke ba su yo mares tize ge tepsi the dang di rangja de ra ni pinju de che di rangja de yores.
And now remember, right, my regular shape protein and my different shape protein, this might work better or it might work worse than this protein. Could be better or worse, we don't know.
Ta thanda nyegyur chagi dumde di ra ta ngoi thanda günde rang dro na dinde chagi ras if di ras tize di ta thanda nyegyur gi kengi di gyosh the res ra tize ible gyo dro res ta di gyo dro du gala yangna ta thabung de le phingre yangna nyug res di ni chi ras yang res yana duga res seo cha se sadi seo cha se yes.
Other questions, or should we ask our questions?
Oh, ta kiran zu ngeni thio mena ani nganzo thio ma tanga sa okay, still there are questions. Pada magi kura denege ani seso sodensi gi mares na ale namshi ke machine thanda pada ma kura dewasam gi cheri gi soden chagores lan ke di reves lan tiora. So there is a question, so when do you call, like when the life originated, when we talk about the union of sperm and egg, so do you call like the moment when the sperm fuses with the egg, is it the moment you say that okay, the life has started now? Because in Buddhism, even if all the even if a sperm and egg fuses, if there is no consciousness which seeps into this union, we don't call it life.
So when does life start in a human?
Sorry?
When does consciousness enter that new phase?
아니 단다 남시 주기요라고 로알라스 디 카드 주기요레스 ता 단다 남시 주에나 체소 레라기요라라 남시 주에 디 카드 주기요레스 아니 디 쿠다니 디 데두갈라 계시 주메나 쿠다니 디 데오에나게 남시 주메나 라라 키나지 안 남시 디 카드 주기요레스
맞아, 컴컴한 이제 아니 제가 제가 사람 같이 좀 말해. 그거 가르는 코로나 탑 가지고 아무도 민다 나오시고 이것도 되게 많더라.
가 당보 가리요레
컴컴하니까 체어서 만들면 생각하면 당보 체어도 분이 나오니까
라우요레스
나오시더라.
실수레 라고라다
아니 그래도 차 먹는데 엄마 같이 나오지. 아서 엄마 같이 요라. 엄마 같이 요라.
엄마 이티디 하
아니 다 같이 차고 때 가보셔라. 어디도 맛이 좋은데
ale ta kya sun khoje mare le mare khachini mare sa sheda sa
ये कार्य कम करूँगा बाबू नाम दीजा पाइए ना कुछ दीनी ये ला नामसी तो आपको नामसी से छाम दे जाएगा ये तो चीज़ तो खेल जाएगा जीवन दी ता कम करके लोग सेवा चाहिए वैसे ये ला नॉर्मल सेवा दीजिए चीज़ कम करके दिवाला देने को भी चिमो चलते हैं वैसे चीज़ दीदी सेवा चाहिए ये तो नाम चाहिए वैसे ताकि तो नाम दीदी सेवा चाहिए वैसे ये तो छाम होने चाहिए
ta thanda kham kaul main bayan je shimba ji buyer lo je ji gor la gore ta changwa mudun yue di quran ki kharishes lana kham kau da mau de ros di deso di ni ge je ji yoras di mai be je shimba thamu shu ji yores di gugu yores di yo ana ani ra mare ra je shimba ji gugu yores la ra al di shedang chik res shedang ni yores ta ni ba di gua al di ko ni ba di shesam do so no what the one at the back he said like okay when this march ki ke jet is lin this kya jalo di chalena so one at the back he said like when there is a union of sperm and egg it is in the state like a fluid state so that's why the consciousness does not enter so when this fluid state turns into kind of like we have milk cream in that state in that type of state when it reaches that state this consciousness enters but the remaining monks said no it's not the case so he said so there are two ways through which we express like consciousness enters the union of sperm and egg so once he said like the first one is when the egg and sperm comes in contact and when it unites there are chemicals inside it but apart from these chemicals which is inside sperm and egg there's a very minute chemical which we cannot see microscopic level he said it's very small so that chemical should be present if that is present the consciousness enters
in Western culture in the West and in our science we don't equate life with consciousness
sorry we also
consciousness and life are not the same thing
ta nganzo nupcho la cha sha na namshe ra namshe dan cheso la di loga sha res
when an egg and a sperm unite because everything is there to make a new person we say that's the beginning of that person's life as soon as the egg and the sperm have made a new nucleus together
ta nganzo khadu cheso chawar la di khadu lagir lawainas thanda kham kau da kham mau ni chik chaira dugura di dudu gala ani ngazuge cheso gozure lagir res
everything is there if left undisturbed for that one cell to become a human
di laduta dini di duni thabungji chayo ras di jalan ngazu dromi di ta dromi ko chu chi res cheso di
but when that fertilized egg is conscious is something I don't think no one in our culture would say they know when that happens
tangaran zo do cha shona ta namshe yor la jora di khadu yor la di ngazu suche shing mares
There's a very famous scientist in Seattle who just wrote an article. He says all he knows for sure is that he's conscious. He's not even sure about the rest of us.
The Korangi Seattle na Mijures, Korangi Karishulana, Koran la Sheba Yolanda, the Koran Sheba Yoding or Hakuis and Lyres, Nemishamba Denzo Yumenga Hakume Lares. Korangaji Koran Shetu Lares. The dishi come tanda come liya lungi come lagora de jungwa na lung she dira ta tanda lung la lungi niba yonge do number ju restaurant Odi tanda ta kiras na namshi zuwa na cheso gochugu yores la ra
namshi khati jore sana pena ne kam ani kasa tabun da mabu sira da gonga ya sila do ani khoni nyambu dene khoni nyambu dene ya ani shawashi mi do da ni jembe ko mo cheba do kashi dene ya jembe mu do kashi ni dene jembe do ya do 제가 기차한테 가와야 와서 나서기 아니 캠페인 로다 나시 슈퍼 했어요. 캠페인 만들어 가래 만성했어요. 나시 만성했어요. 그 휴나고 같이 감감만이 되는 캠페인 용어 말이에요. 대모임한테 가르치면서 나시 많이 했어요. 나도 참 되니까.
So we make distinctions whether the fertilized egg has a life or not based on like if there is a union of a sperm and egg, and if that fertilized egg keeps on reproducing, that from that moment we call like, okay, now consciousness has entered. That's why it has started its life. Even if there is a union of sperm and egg, and if that egg do not develop, we say that okay, consciousness has not entered. That's why it has not formed a life. So we create distinctions like this.
Well, I think they're very interesting questions, and hopefully you can bring some of our science and biology perspective and knowledge as you guys debate those questions all year long.
The kiranzo tiwa denzo doling chue kapso ani kengi riba ye da she laura sheja de nyam do kini ani shero chis.
Anda maso do cheso do na ra. Ji ani kasa nuko da si ni chimbi da ani bobo de se do. Tu sa ni bobo ni shamba ji do ma na me na nuko do ji mi ni memory se ani ko ni lo se
Mirgo gorilla lagiwa. Mirgo gorilla lagiwa. Mirgo
nuko si ji
Madina khatisha mirgo di manzugi. Mirgo di khari lan thido.
nuko da chi mi da ni ani chimbi ani bobo ni se do.
Denzo ale mebo chik ni chamba reslan ale ha. Mani mirgo di ngonzo dir lar samsa.
Mi da nuko di su mi do
Khande ji reslan mebo di. So in this textbook I have read like humans, gorillas, chimpanzees, these have a common ancestor. So I would like to know how this common ancestor looks like.
Depends how recently you look at that ancestor. The more recent, the more they'll look like something between the two. The farther back you go, the more primitive looking that the more different that organism will look from present day animals.
Diladu mebo latta wa nasra. Tuzu kagas ki sar wa nasra. Di ani ngaran so ithanda mida chimpanzee ro chana dini ki phar do ju thungres. An thande dini tuzu ma thewa ina mebo di maya ya draw ina tigas ki an tha ringa dures.
And some of those fossils of the what we call hominids or the early the one that's called Lucy and so on, they can, by looking at the bones, make a pretty good picture of what they may have looked like.
That and the hominid rig ras, Denzuki Kunzo Ruba Lingu ras, Ruba Lin Digdugal, any Kunzo Candes Tungu Ladoni, then the Sugures Kuranzogi, Terriba Denzogi. Part in the Sungue, Kirangi part in the Sungue. Country may happen to do Slara. So it is mentioned that there is a common ancestor for all, like humans, chimpanzees, gibbons and all. So can you point out that, okay, this is our common ancestor? Is there anything at which we can point out and say, okay, this is our common ancestor?
Nothing that's alive, but there are probably fossils from around that time that could tell us what that common ancestor may have looked like.
I think it looks more like that old
Yeah, we think that the beginning of the primates was a small primate.
So there is a fossil, right?
Yeah.
Tangazo tandolundi rijura, dido primate la di chashona tangbo gozungi jura, digi yurdo yores, yurdo di kandre jurla na chunju jures. Simje takingwe chunju jures di, solcha di.
I'd have to look up to see pictures.
An tanda tse osa kandre jume jura. Sai kola chani. Tungjur ngabju. Tungjur ngabju ladu gala ta terbunga ro chagyora. So when we read different textbooks, some say the earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago, and in some textbook we read it's 5 billion years ago. So what is this? There are differences.
Making estimates from 4 to 5 billion years ago is difficult. So they are estimates. They're based off of things that we can observe now. But, right, just like if I was to see your lunch plate after you were done eating, and I weighed you before and after you were done eating lunch, I could estimate how much you ate, but without actually seeing how much you ate, my estimate might not be perfect. So we think it's somewhere in that range. As we get more information, we will probably get more precise in our estimate. But scientists, right, we make our best guesses, but it's still just a guess, it's not a fact.
That handa lobdina tri dos mindo ashida chaga ngalani dila duda lo mangbu shungwen ke jashi ras di an seriba den soba shisha gyures one demba res lan di shigi yomores an thanda pesha na kirangi dermana na khalaj lu shayona ni thangbo kirangi khala khagasto jela ani kiran sasani tadu gola ani kiran derma dil tadu an kirangi khala digas sashalan la thu ras thoina kesi ma thoina kiran sasa ina khagas sai menge la thu marwas tiru chadures Digita di thanda di choba chisha yores temba maresti fact mares. Seo chasu di length so sagala. Tuwa di length so sadi. Yes, I got the answer.
The pictures make it look like a very small mouse-sized thing that almost looks like a little squirrel. That's the very beginning. By its teeth and a few other things, they think it's the first beginning of primates.
tanda nakshi la jua gileri yo dende rik jures hambo go chup du dende jur la ni te res di par de ni so sa kiran zul te os
Here's our ancestors.
ngazu me bo di res me bo dende ro jures ta
Long ago.
chapter mo
미실에 가서 여기 토단을 주어요.
가르치네
토단 주어야죠. 토단.
tukdang jue ha
저기 안에 가서 미실에 그래서 안에 맛이 소 여러 배 영화.
tukdang jue ga so yo zigure me zigure restaurant so have you heard about great lamas who stays in the same position, like if it's in a sitting position, it keeps on in that position and the body do not rot even after he is declared dead. So what do you consider? Do you consider this body as a living or dead?
For scientists, we consider something dead when the brain dies.
The tuwa kharsilana tukdam shuwe ka su ta lubo jura di ani cheso yo aji yor me aji yor reslan di tuwa ra an ling khar geslana manzo cheri ba cha sho na shire la du kha shiwa res la jura di khadu la yor la na level lega she jam sho na ani mi di shiwa res la yor res
So it stays in the same position after it dies?
ta tukdam shudu thara thanda khande shu na thara shugu yor was. Yes.
So we would consider that to be dead. We know that when people die, a few hours after they die, they start to get hard and they will stay in whatever position they were in when they died.
Dila du tangazu miji chongwa inasra chongsa yela khande dewa ina thana sugu di thaku chagyo res ani ni khande yo di nangshi de di res chisa yela.
And then after several more days, it will relax further once things start to degrade more.
Ani ma khashes jela anta ruguras khali rudu du ani mar ridu res thanda khande dewa di de thu yo mares.
So I've never heard of that camel, but that would be my guess, is that the camel dies and it stays hardened in that position until it degrades very far.
So it takes more time. Okay. Ta thanda ngazung ngamong na la di thoy res. Ta shidu gal ya lang ni shu na gyuring bu tehran de di res. Ani ma khashe jel ta subur yo go chugura ani ma sala sa du res. Ine thanda tukdam ko la ko ma sons khar chidangi.
남시 와요. 아니 남시라 세르바 다시 가려면 남시세 요만. 근데 남시세 하면 보통 같은 증증.
Thanda khuta drain namshi la dira. Namshi mangbu yo sheba shi di shiwo mare. Sheba rig mangbu ir la dira thanda kyanzo. Thanda khiran sheba namshi la di khare khuta dredu gala chik juye di ondira.
남시세 다 세르바 다시 가려면 요만 그래서 남시세. 그래도 증증 많이 나면 막 피고 그래서 빈이랑 말해서. 아니 드리 따져야 되는 세르바만 치아리요 그래서 그것도 남시자지 요리도 지나고 그 가운데 지금 직전에 오지래서 전통기 봤다니 진들에서 하는 그 주사지 요리서 요런게 다 가운데 지나는 건데 라반
Kam kau the mau di namshi jyor lagi ros ngazo nangbe ni di seriba di muji chigi yor res kheling yor res yo aina khande jore sukjen re sumere khande res thadong chishina thongu res. So in Buddhism we talk about consciousness entering when there is a union of sperm and egg. So do you believe in this consciousness? Do science believe in this consciousness?
I thought consciousness was not there in the beginning in Buddhism. No? Wasn't that what we learned from before? There is no consciousness at the very beginning.
Okay, so he said like when there is a union of sperm and egg, and when the consciousness enters, so he's talking about that consciousness. So do science believe in this type of consciousness? And if so, is it something physical that we can see under microscope?
Consciousness and what is consciousness, who's conscious, who's unconscious, those are questions that are not directly addressed by biology, I think.
Tatanda sheba jigura namshi ladi di an kengu riba gi khaptu thegar dewa che jura dishe che di chiyo mares.
I think those are questions that are more in the realm of philosophy or a bigger discipline. Biology is very based on what we can see and poke and measure and draw, and not on something that's not easily testable.
Ta kengu ribagi khamnal kharit sudur lawana nga zu takche che rung ajura dige rik sangma chugu res lakba chaya yoda thoya yoda takche che thuje pheju shim che juri di sangma chugu res ta thanda namshe laidi ta kharina chugu rodlana ta rup dendena la chugu rodos kengu ribagi takche che tu dende marwasti.
I think if you got 10 really smart biologists to sit here and talk about consciousness, they might have 12 different answers.
Ta thanda namshe kor la kengu ribo khewa choose del zomba inas ta namshe kor shedala na koran so ile mendo choose kegu resti thola.
It's just different in the West. It's hard to describe, but biology would really deal with concrete things, not what we would call abstract ideas, I guess.
Dile duta thanda samchu roda namshe laidi dinde rigala ani kengu ripa ge shetu khaku chago res ngara zu thoya yo da jigyora dige rig sama ani kengu ripa na chu res.
In some sense, talking about consciousness is very is much harder than talking about DNA makes RNA makes protein.
Ta thanda DNA ni RNA sugar RNA ni tije sugar la jara ani thanda di da duru ainas namshe korshi ainas namshe dike korshi pet kha chago res kengu ripa nala.
Any questions that I can answer?
Ani tuwa in the US Ling gela.
Then quand il is doing that down looking shapa down and move la ba des donc c'est des comme ça mon petit son des autres de la kunoni parce que là c'est des mots time java des mots time dans java des mots time dans ai des mots time nyam de time pour ça des mots de dire pour ça parce que so chati no di tense research chason se dine kuni resi jo so you know loving the ziku ke chasu mo jache kujira kuni na Mother said the moment, was to turn the thing with the kakari, as the dress at the mother's moment. To show some which down there.
Mandra Manga Dusra.
Good because dress at John's king younger. That didn't dress as other king young. I think was the motor you said Java, the mirror down, Kanapi is a young term. It is in the diving, Koran Dogi, the disease. That's what the show some.
So he said, like when you showed the bones of humans, like the species which are related, humans, arms of humans and wings of bat and the fins of dolphin. So it looks like you are just taking the parts which are similar, but when we look at the whole body of the dolphin, only this part is similar to human. Remaining part of the body is not similar. So we can say that the part which are dissimilar.
The brain of a dolphin uses the same chemicals to look at the world as my brain. The eye of a dolphin uses the same molecular processes to see as I do. The lungs, as they go in and out in a dolphin, use the same nerves and kinds of cells and things called alveoli and surfactant, and you could just do a list of the basic processes that are same between me and a dolphin. It's not just that their flipper is different, is the same. Almost the molecules and the way the brain works and the way the lungs work and the way the heart beats are very similar.
The thanda kherangi shedi lakpa de da shokpa de shero dini chipu daudus la dini chipu maris thanda ngajutta oinas leba nala thanda je yama loya jora minala dida dolphin na lebe na je lu yoras dini daw yores thana shinga zo lo na ta oina ge nanglo la mangbu jora chashi chungju deso di mida ani dolphin ni daw cha de yores thana shi mi gi ta oina mi gi nanglo je da thanda dudul ri joras di khande lega chigo ne jurim jodan di dolphin na lage tharan du yores daw cha de yores. They
nurse their young, they breed, they give rise to live babies. They're more similar to me. They're mammals, they have hair. Maybe if somebody came from outer space and looked down and could see inside all the chemicals, they'd say, oh, humans and dolphins, they're the same.
Ale mi da dolphin chik paresha lag res.
Okay, so it's not just we give that in as example because it's easy to see and to see the bones, but if I looked at the genes of a dolphin and the genes of a human, you'd find, I don't know, 90, I don't know what percent, but very high percent similarity between our genes.
Ta thanda di nganzu ruba gala pesun chi buch tuen res thong se yo ros chezam pesun sam sha res ta ine dawe chala du gala mangbu shu cha yo res ta dolphin the middle cha sha wa na rigze gora ta wa na gyaja mangbu shu ji thung yo res ni
tanda koram yer sunji de su de se yo 거기 가서 새로 동부대 새로 전에 오는 데니 이렇게 직발이었어. 데니 매운 데라에서 쓰려라. 다른 지역에 데니 매운 데라에서 단다 그 신지 니 문다 니 매운 통화도 좋아요.
단다 내게 단다 요로에서
매우 요데 거기 버지니까 요데 거니 예리 거니 가가신
단다 니리 카가 요로 고라니게 메보들란 단다 떼 요로에서 단다 촌에 징에 요로에서
아니 단다 머리를 고쳐라 문도 텔레진 차선을 텔레진 저기 상황에는 차선을 묘어디 맞아 요리요리 시야 맞고 중국부터 내리시 단다 잡고 저기 되는
So he's asking whether the ancestor of two different species is there any example which is living?
The fact that we call it an ancestor means that it's gone off into two different species, and the original form is now in us and in our most related other species, but that ancestor is gone unless it's a fossil.
Ta mebola du galang anju gita reuni pe ni chik lesa chik di shi yo ras dila du di cha di ni ga na lo yo res ra kurangi gyuro di ni ga na le de res ine ta anju thanda yo ro la na de tuen yo mares karina thong yo la na anju gyurdo na ni yo res mebo den zo.
So chimpanzees are our closest living relative.
Anju gita nyeri na nyesho khari cha yo la na chimpanzee rig den zo res.
But the chimpanzees came from a common ancestor here, and
ta mi da chimpanzee cha sha na kurani ga gi mebo chik res.
Human beings and chimpanzees are related from some common ancestor here. Let's see if I can draw a chimp. No, I can't draw a chimp.
Di mi res di chimpanzee res an thanda di perim gi tongbo di ta hoina korani gi mebo chik res.
It's not like long ago a chimp started changing piece by piece by piece by piece to a human, and the chimp is still there, but we're its higher up cousins. It's not the chimp became a human.
Ta di ma res to dang di ta khashi khari sam sigir lana chimpanzee di khali ani mila jure la jo ras niri di ma res. Karimba mi dubegi ha mi dubegi
sijinar mutu chishi na ore agar tempo na mutu yo marilo
mi gi nyeri thanda nyeri jido ani
marang yi bachira marang tuni ne lo mawishira remodo tena singina tu chishi na ore rendo ta tempo ne mutu yo marese ade kare ko donjo tinde ke mara de jese jere ma to jin teleji bi pata dar clear kare
ta tuzo shte ra digas ne mi gosu res lago ras
This is the Jimba and this changing over the was one, then you see foundation to the Tizen didn't over by Mutun the Vazra. It was Matuda. But they put a Mayo
and the perim gidombonala. Okay, so in a phylogenetic tree,
don't you remember the Mara Judas and Judo is moving Judo in Mudula, Judas and Jerega, Teleship began Mayo maybe Judo to the mother of
so in a phylogenetic tree, you have shown humans, right? And at this particular time, humans starts to came into the earth.
Yep.
So is it is it because of like there was no evidence of fossils that before that time there was no human beings? So is it based on the evidence that you receive from fossils that we say that humans come on the earth at this particular time?
There were these things called hominids. So between this ancestor and humans are all those other species of hominids, we call them. Well, it's before even hominids, but if Neanderthal people were still here, they'd be a closer relative, but they're extinct. And so on. So when we point to this, there were still many steps of things that came off that are no longer here.
Tanda di trodan di tongbo di chasha oinas yalga dine ni hominid la di chagu roas dine ni ani mi char lagu roas mi ma cha gon la dine ni yalga chunju ni mangbu chi thyo res chik pe shana Neanderthal la di bas di zadong chira ni yo maris thyan na shi di jibu mai ba yalga shimba ya thyo res tinzo thanda yo maris zadong chin sa yo res. So does it mean that there are no humans before this time?
No, there were humans. Remember, there were Neanderthals. There were that little guy who was only about 3 feet tall. There were other things more closely related to us.
No, he's not asking about relation. He said humans. He's particularly talking about.
We're the only species of humans right now.
So you said like humans came on Earth at this particular time. So before that there were no humans, right?
There are no humans of our species until a certain point in time. But there were lots of other species with the word. So the humans here now are Homo sapiens.
Tanda mi nyeri chu ros dilanga zui khari lagirla na Homo sapiens lagirlas do mi di chadu ros.
But before that, in this genus Homo, there was Neanderthal, there was something else, and some of those overlapped in time, even with Homo sapiens.
Hine gyuta wana gyuchikpa chikyo yores Homo la di gyura di nyeri ro gyuta wana Homo Neanderthals lana tanda gyuchikpa chadu yores.
If you traveled to Europe 20,000 years ago, you would have run into Neanderthal people.
That Europe na la kesi kiran lo tinyi skon la leo inas ro yo inas Neanderthal thon yores kiran zui.
Whether you want to call them humans or you want to just call, we are the only species of humans now. If you were there 20,000 years ago, would you say you're not a human? Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were very similar. They'd be closer cousins than chimps if they were still here.
So the lo tinyi kon la kiran phe Europe na leo ina Neanderthal thongu res la ra ta dil kiran mi mare la ni la tu sare mare sakhain la di mi da ta ina new shu res thanda ganzu chimpanzee nyeshu la ora kesi Neanderthal yo ina mi da nyeshu khari chadyor la na Neanderthal chadyor res.
Clear as mud again.
Seo chas res adi tamba do seo chas la
mas tanda ka nido da mai bachra tanda ma jiyo ma tagara ane lo tni kan yo mare se do hotel ane ta me bujin ro pada ro kare hotel.
So you said like humans tinyi lamba. So in this phylogenetic tree we see that milana Homo sapiens rang ra draw midi Neanderthal sigo mara. So in this phylogenetic tree I see that the Homo sapiens first came onto being before 200,000 years ago. So does that mean that what is the evidence that there were no humans before 200,000 years ago? So how can you say that there were no humans before that? What is the evidence?
Well, you won't see anything that looks closely, you'll see our ancestors that look very different. It's perhaps arbitrary to say these are the first humans, but it's based on how their bones looked, whether they were had the ability to have hands and pelvis and upright and like us. It's arbitrary what you call human because there are lots of ancestors before Homo sapiens that are of a different genus. You might remember there was Lopithecines or something, Pithecines. There were other genuses that we call the ancestors of humans. Whether you want to say, were these pretty much like humans? It just depends on how they looked compared to what we have now.
Diladita tanda tadu gola nganzu tanda draw mi tadu gola ani yama tanda gyula ta na gyuminda australopithecus lan dende yores diladu gola rubada dendel tadu gola ani mi da minda yo jang khoran zu loga shali yores.
And some of them used tools and some of them did higher functions, but calling something human, I think right now we can find it to anything that in this tree that had the same genus as us, which is Homo.
Ta nganzu mi draw mi la di tanda nganzu gyu Homo la yo jo jura dina look she yores. So his question was, what is the evidence that you in this tree I've seen like the humans first came into being 200,000 years ago.
Right.
So how can you say that there were no humans before that? What is the evidence?
Because they don't find any fossils of anything that are close enough to be called a human. They were something almost human, but not what we would call human. It's maybe a bit arbitrary, but that's about the time that we think.
Tanganzu ta tanda robzi roji shini la sha yo res tinda tujosh do diladu nganzu kharil shisha gorla na pangda tanda gyurdo rang la sha yo res gyurdo di ninga dende ra yo maris ra ena ge mi da nyu yo ma shi mi rang re la ni dende nyu yo maris.
And maybe tonight on the news they'll say they found some fossil somewhere that's even older that makes the first human a little bit more back.
Chezanta sarngi chung dige ros kese thari konda ro ngazo national dende shi ko ainas ta gyurdo ningba shu jinye res tani diladu gol ningba shu la du thanda tini thishara tini gi nge ga jinye ro na tuzo diti smart tang res ngazo dil gyo tang res
ngal to chura chuna agar mi na thori chi shari mamba shu chi res ra ta shari chi ka chi dar se ko command tang sare ni jaga ma pe na jaga lu na chi khna tagara ma ma sha chi jaga lu na chi khna so tagara command 손에 제 도요. 가서 아마도야 정바이나 아마도 손에 제 도요. 되게 바라 인생 자 가려.
차데디 아프리카 가지 레스라 tekfurni gyagalale
정한도 거는 아프리카 땅 다시 하듯이 좀 다가 손에 자가만 그래나 또다가 정한이야 손에 제 도요.
tishuanga thio gochuma chade gonga afrika tangra ani gyagal khile res chade de
나 아마도 그 마셔봐이나 정한이야 손에 제 도요.
gonga gal ama di made wainas ama me gal chade le cheptu chawi yores ama me waines
ama shosona koi ba ya chone je doyo
al ama dam yume kheba yomarata shi yume dira di khar khosla re thosla dinne chudi Siribaji, okay. So he has heard a story from a scientist, and he told him that there is a bird in Africa which lays its egg in. If it lays its egg in Africa and it flies to India, if the mother bird survives, the egg hatches, and if the mother bird dies, the egg do not hatch. So, what is the relationship between these? Whether a mother is living or dead? So,
well, that would be really interesting. We haven't heard of that in the States. Megan, have you? If a bird flies from where to where? If a bird flies from Africa to India and lays the egg in Africa and it makes it to India, the egg hatches.
I mean, if the mother bird survives, the egg hatches. Even if the mother bird is not there with the egg, the mother bird is there in India.
Oh, that she doesn't have to watch over the egg
no,
for it to hatch?
The mother bird is still in India, but still the egg hatches. But if the mother bird dies, the egg do not hatch.
How do you know which egg goes to which bird, though?
Ani kyanzo thanda goanjira cha khari gajim bakhandes chetures.
대 단다 라케지요. 대 라케 되고나 기시 세리 종이지.
세리바지레스. 게시레. 게시 다 세리바 니가레. 게시 세리바 니가레.
세리 종이.
아니 게시 지기시라. 세리바 마라. 세리바레. 세리바레 마레. 세리바야 그런 게 좀 있어. 세리바. 게시 다 세리바 니가레.
Who has followed a bird from Africa to India?
That's why I asked him. He said this story was told by a geshe, and he's also a scientist. I said, okay, if he's a geshe, if he's a scientist or not. He said, yeah, he is a scientist.
But just because someone's a scientist doesn't mean they're right about everything.
체릭 장gen지래 체릭 빠지래 개봐요라 니니가 체릭 빠지래 고라 now he changed his answer. He said he is not a scientist. He was studying science then.
To be honest, we would be here very skeptical that has any reality.
Tadi sheras gochum seu sheras chagum dulas di demba da mitum ba rojuresh
You could do an experiment though, right?
Ke mares kerangi taji chicho res digala.
Put a dot on the bird, mark it, and tell your friend back at India to tell you if that bird makes it back, and you watch the egg.
Ta keran dichi urdalas taji chidugala injim jigonga dil ta gas. Ani chadi patang sara. Ani gagal dungi thopu dil keja tris chadi de do de mindu che do se mindu keja tris ani gonga ditta mi de taji chidi. La Hare Rube Lagu du suilar onde lagu du lara suilar siri bai la sons okay la tinde la sons ta di siri ba mone ro lange
Are they saying the story? Are they saying it's true?
Yeah, no, he's talking about turtles. So he said mother turtle lays its egg on the shore and goes back into the sea. If a mother turtle survives, the egg hatches, and if the mother turtle dies, it doesn't. So it's the same case. And he said it was told by a scientist.
Okay, so I don't know if these things are true. I would like to see the experiments, but if I saw data that showed me it's true, here would be my hypothesis.
My
hypothesis would be that if the mother is in good health, she's young, she's very fit, she lays good eggs, and she also tends to survive. And that is why you see those two things go together. A healthy egg, a healthy mom, both will do well. If the mother is old and sick, maybe her eggs are also old and sick.
So he
Our camera guys get
So he said he's translating in between. So he said the mother turtle leaves its egg on the shore and goes back into the sea. And so it does not look after the eggs.
Yeah, but we know that if I have a baby when I'm 20, that baby is very likely to be very healthy. If I have a baby when I am 49, there's a good chance that baby might not be so healthy.
Tangaran ro cha shawainas tangal ro nishula kisingal puj kewainas pu dingara hakur res khare hakur lana thangbu shuj ki res pu ta lo shib shagus la kewaina ta gyaja rota waina pu thangbu shera ki me dinge she thu res.
Not because I take worse care of it when I'm old, but because my eggs are not as healthy when I make that baby. I don't know if it's the same for turtles and birds, but perhaps.
Ta thanda ngi thanda di lo shib shagula ta pu shira thangbu ki mar la jora di ani ngi sogyong chi ma chi dil kheba yo mares tabu ma ja dende mares kais na ngara subu di gengo chadu gala ani konga e digas thangbu yo mares di kengi res an thanda di pesun di thanda rube di da chikba chagyo na hong ma sons pheje yin si res dende roj. No, it's not the same. They are deciding it's not the same.
Seri bingone ani mi sewa de kande chi le shawen mi ngo ji ora mi ngo da an simjen chi la kya bi ngo ji kande shawen seri bingone
mi da mi gi ngo che ani socha gi ngo
socha sen simjen
socha animal le yo
ta so nambing mane sen da nga samada animal na chu ora 이좀더 심전랑기다 모치다 미 모셔야 간디질 샤기네.
So in science, how do you define a human being and how do you define an animal?
Human beings are our species of Homo sapien. So we define it by our DNA, by the fact that we can mate with each other, by our appearance, all of those things.
Ta tanda nganzugi draw mi lejora di an ngara sama tawina Homo sapiens chik chadyo ras dila du ngara sugi DNA sama chikwa chikthin res chikwa chadyo res do res thana shi an pha chu pho da mo phenju theni pu ke yora dinde chitu yo che an tadu nangchu tadu khurani ani do chadyo res cheza dinde jila ni ngazo mi lagyo res.
Human beings are also a type of animal. We define animal as by the characteristics of our cell. So we are eukaryotes, but we are not plants because plants have a cell wall and animals do not.
Tanganzo mi res ani tanda mi di karina chu lawana socha nal ji res herina dila du wala socha la du nganzo socha na khande chi cha do lana thabong ningde engyo jura ningden keng ri di cha do res and ningden la du gal chishing la ge tening yorwas ine dini para kheba khari lawana chishing la thabong gi chigo di res mi gi thabong la chigo di yo mares.
The kingdom of animals is very, very, very large. Homo sapiens refers just to one species. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of species in the animal kingdom.
Tanda midi karina chugo launa ling na shagra ling tanda semji socha gi ling na chugo res di nyeri socha gi ling na nyeri chik chadyo res socha gi ling chazang ta na di na lo nyeri tongdo mangbu res di na chik draw midi chugo res.
We sadly are about out of time.
Ta tuju Simpsons.
So we want to say just a few things before you go today. So one, I love to see how you all are thinking and trying to see if what you know can be explained by evolution and by the science of biology.
Tanda kiran so samlo tangtang da de ani thuwa tangtang da di sama ani kengu ripo da de pelgu da de kiran so thuwa tang da sti thong ga chung sons.
I encourage you to continue those thoughts on how do what you know and your beliefs perhaps about Buddhism and the world, are they explained with biology? Do they not fit together? Do they integrate?
Chezan di kiran so taji cheres tanda nangchu ni shewe ta tanda sheju mangbu juros di ani tanda ngazu gi chering na le shewe phejur da mangbu ji shewe ras kengu ripo na di ani ndi thungu mendu di kiran so tares.
And I see a common theme often, and it seems to be happening here, where you think about these kind of bizarre things about nature and the world and say, that doesn't make sense. How could that be?
La du kiran so gita besu mangbu khile so sta chidang gi rangjung khamnal besu khensa wende dila du di indes yong sing mares di khensa shu dus lan dinde nesu mangbu ji yang kiran so besu sha sos.
There have been many times where people have had those same thoughts about many things in history. And every time scientists have looked at it, it's turned out to be one of two things.
Dila duta dende nesu khensa hang sai ro ndi li ros dile dugal cheri bai ta je chedugala ni rago res ni.
Either what humans thought was wrong, right? That life cannot come from just mud, for example.
Dila duta ni yor la dugal chik dikhar la na yong masia no de jo dende ji res ta pesha waina ani cheso lady damni chungu marwas.
Or there was something about life which we didn't understand, and so we study it and learn more about it.
Chezan chik dikhar lan ta di mai ba ha ko du tagda member ha ko du digal tagji chini ani khari ba di cheju che cha du res.
If there's one thing that I think every single scientist or biologist in the world would agree to, it's that life is so complicated and it has constantly surprised us in many ways in all the things that it can do that we would not have expected before we learned about it.
Tanda kengu riba da cheri ba cha shani da shewainas ta cheso lai di nyojin chen shu cha de res di tanda ngazu majang ko la ni ngazu gi khari imba di ta dinde ingire samjo di mangche minda was thwendi gi res ta ji shi du gala saw mangbu shi ni res chezan cheso lai di nyojin chen shu cha de res.
We thought that after there was the nuclear bomb that there would be no life growing there for years and years and years, for 100 years. But the next year, there was life again.
Ta thanda tedulgi thanda barzen de suyos di tandu galani seso chel hag marlani sheros dinde yuk chayo jalani lo mangbo jel tadu galaya seso nyores.
We thought that no life could possibly survive on the bottom of the ocean where there is no light and it's dark and cold. But when we finally built machines that could go down there, we found life.
Ta ne nyama khari samge urla na chogi bad ting ting draw inas di nagong che yo che yo mares dila du dela ngajo cheso nig marlan ngarang chu shi yores jela thuje yarge du tadu gala cheso ni yores.
So I am not disheartened when you tell me about these things that surprise me and I am doubtful of. I find it exciting because perhaps we would find that it's not true, or perhaps we would find that there's something very exciting that we just don't know about yet.
Chezanta nesu hansan ro yam chimbu mangbuji shero as keransui ta dila du gala thanda dibezu shagyo ro chagyo res nga hangsang dus chezanta dila do san ni res chi kharir lana temba mares chi kharir lana cheni taje che yo ros dini res.
Like, we did not know that a yak and a bull could mate and have a baby, but that's absolutely true. We looked it up yesterday.
And the female is fertile. That's brand new to me.
Ta thanda keranzo ngal nesu ji she bas zomo thanda khare dida langni dena ni zomo zoda zomo chungures la roas an zomo ke waina di rangjo regu di peyor la roas di an ngara sedu thajana sedu reshas di nesu di ngara ni la sawa chadures sawa shin sonsti.
I'm assuming our camera people will not come tomorrow to videotape the exam.
Ani keranzo sai exam su ping marasa.
So I'd like to say tujeshe to our cameramen. Thank you very much. I will see you all in the morning though.
The Kurani the ping maras ne keranzo chama sangi je yons shuru.